Hello, my name is Ann Abbott from the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And yesterday I had a conversation with a student of mine who just graduated. Congratulations, Maura. And one of the questions that she asked me was about her proficiency level. What is her proficiency level in Spanish, and how can she talk about that proficiency level in Spanish? And so I gave her an answer that I want to share with you, and it has three parts. The first is the cheap answer. The second is the more expensive answer. And then the third is what I would consider the real answer. And so I want to give you all of that. But first, I want to talk just a little bit about proficiency levels. So in the United States, the proficiency guidelines that are most commonly used are called ACTFL. I'll give you some information here on the screen about ACTFL proficiency levels. And they go from novice, novice low, novice mid, novice high. And you can't really do very much with a language, but you can do some things with a language. To intermediate, and that would also be intermediate low, mid, or high. And then you move on to advanced, low, mid, high, superior, and maybe even distinguished, but that's a very difficult one to attain. But anyway, those are some labels that we can use to talk about proficiency levels in any language, but today I'm talking about Spanish. So, how do you know what your proficiency level is? The cheap answer that I gave to Maura is that you can take a Versant test, and I'll give you some information about how to find that online here on this video. And that is a telephone test that you take. You dial a number, and it is a computer that you interact with, actually. It's a fairly quick, fairly inexpensive test that in the end will give you a result that then you can correlate to one of those ACTFL levels I just described. The more expensive answer and way to find out your Spanish proficiency is to take an ACTFL OPI test, and that can either be done through the computer or through a telephone conversation with a real human being where you will interact, and that person then will in the end give you a rating, again using those labels of proficiency levels that I explained earlier. And then I get to what I would call the real answer. What is your goal? If your goal is to be able to talk about your proficiency level on your resume, on your job search items, in an interview, sure, you can say, I took the Versant test and I have the equivalent of a, let's say, intermediate high Spanish. And that's fine and that's accurate. But outside of your language teachers, most employers are not going to know what intermediate high means. What are they really interested in? They want to know more than labels, more than jargon. What can you do in Spanish on the job and for the job? So the most important thing is to be able to put on your resume, to talk about in your interviews and in your cover letters, things that you have actually done in Spanish. And maybe all you've done in Spanish is used it in the classroom setting. So you can talk about how you have done research in Spanish, you read in Spanish, you've done research in Spanish, and you've written academic essays in Spanish. Okay, that might be useful to an employer. Maybe what you've done are several oral presentations in your Spanish classes where you did research, you wrote up PowerPoint slides in Spanish and stood there and gave your oral presentation in Spanish. That might be of interest to some employers. If you have studied abroad, you're going to have a wide range of things that you've been able to do in Spanish. But if you've done an internship or if you've done any community service learning work like students of mine have done, then you can really talk about how you have used Spanish in professional settings. So I'm going to take an example of the refugee center where many of my students work. I just finished reading up many of the end of the semester assessment items that my students wrote about their work, and one person who wrote about her work in the refugee center talked about answering the phone. And so you can say to your employer or on your resume when you talk about what you accomplished in your work at the refugee center, you can say, I'm able to take phone calls and in Spanish. I am able to make cold calls in Spanish to people that I don't know to gather information. If that's something you've done at the Refugee Center, if Guadalupe or Maite ever said to you, give this person a call and find out when their appointment is, or rearrange their appointment with me, then you can say that that's what you've done, because you did make a cold call in Spanish to someone. If you, one of the students wrote in her final assessment that she had, for example, talked to a client about, this client came into the Refugee Center with a huge thousands and thousands of dollars medical bill. She made the phone calls and found out that he actually qualified for a special program that the hospital had, and so that he was not going to have to pay that medical bill. He was not going to have to pay those thousands and thousands of dollars. And at first he was incredulous, and then she was able to explain to him how that worked. And so then what does that translate into? You can say, I can talk about financial issues and financial documents with clients in Spanish. And I could go on and on about all kinds of examples of work that my students have done at the Refugee Center in Spanish that would be of interest and are directly translatable to work that they would be doing with an employer in the future. So if your end goal is not just to have a name to put to your proficiency level, but to be able to tell potential employers what you have done and what you can do in Spanish, especially in a professional setting, then really use your resume and your cover letter and your interview to talk about what you have done in Spanish that is directly relatable to the kinds of tasks that you would probably be doing on the job for them.